caller in Winnipeg.
Hello.
Hello, I'm looking for Paul Hendrick. It's Cindy Crawford calling.
Hey, Cindy, how are you?
Yes.
Just getting into the rink here, Mike.
Well, you know what? I bet you are. And by the way, Henny, so great to hear from you, my friend. Thanks for joining us here on rawmikeRichards.com.
Yeah, always a pleasure. Do I get a loot bag on the way out?
Well, you get nothing, but I will tell you.
It's more than I usually get.
Yeah. Well, and look, I was saying about the setups on, what you have on night number one, and sometimes they don't mean that much. And again, it's just the start of 82 games. But from a hockey fan perspective, if I'm looking at sort of the goals that we see and the aspirations by those young Toronto Maple Leafs against a team in Winnipeg that thinks they have something going too, non-conference game, but boy, this is a great setup for game number one, isn't it?
Oh, it's fantastic. And I'll tell you what, Mike, for both these clubs, and Mike Babcock said in training camp, the first 20 games, it's essential to get out of the gate quickly because otherwise you're chasing your tail. And you look at Winnipeg in particular last year, in wins and losses, they finished 5 games above 500, but did not get above 500 on a consistent basis until the end of March. And at that point in time, it was done. So, getting off to a good start, injuries are going to come at some point in the season, but you've got to have a mattress, so to speak, in which to land on, and it starts here tonight in a building that historically has been as tough as they come for the Maple Leafs.
Yeah, it really has, Henny. Hey, great talking to you, my friend. I'm guessing this is a pretty easy scenario. Frederik Andersen is your starting goaltender. There's no question about that. Any other lineup changes, or who are the odd people out in this game when we look at a Leafs lineup that hasn't taken the ice yet at Bell MTS Place just yet? But who are the expected scratches for the Maple Leafs?
Well, this was a preseason where it was fairly much predictable, Dave. And, the top 3 lines in Toronto, I mean, that's as balanced offensively as you're going to get. And so no surprises there. It was all in the 4th line, I think, are the big surprises. Now, who would be the center? Eric Fair gets the nod over Dominic Moore. And, Moore signed a 1-year contract for $1 million, and you thought that he had the inside track, but Eric had a tremendous training camp as well. He is a right-handed shot, I think, which complements what his wingers need to do. So maybe in some respect a bit of a surprise there, but the other obviously is on the blue line where Andreas Boardman got the nod over Callie Rosen and several others. So he'll pair up on the 3rd pairing with Connor Carrick in a natural left-right complement. And we'll see what he can do. The Leafs will be missing some grit on the blue line in terms of Roman Polak, but the team thinks at age 23 that Boardman is capable of doing that, former Swedish Rookie of the Year in his SHL last year, Swedish Hockey League champion as well. So they like his acumen, and this is as good a Maple Leaf team, and this is my 20th year covering this club, as they've ever had, and that includes the Pat Quinn teams of the late 90s and early 2000s.
Well, that's making a huge statement, Henny, but I understand why you're saying that. I still think in my experience, too, sort of growing up with the Leafs, my uncle being the trainer for about 1,000 years, Gunnar Kinnear, I was always very, very close to this team, and I've never seen an organization, and especially the Maple Leafs, but really any organization that stripped it down to the wood like they did to get here. In terms of its blueprint, you can't argue with how they've got it done. They've been pretty consistent, and so now you find yourself upon a season where there's a lot of expectation down the road, but let's face it, in the modern era of how you play in the NHL now, success, it all seems to revolve around that goaltender, what you've got between the pipes. And from your perspective, do they have what it takes between the pipes?
Well, I think they do. And I think Frederik Andersen, as the season progressed last year, coming off the shoulder injury in September, showed that he was able to lift this team. He's going to get 60 starts again this year. And I think, Mike, if there is an injury on this team that it can ill afford, some say Auston Matthews, Nylander, you can run down the list up front. I don't think there's any other argument that would go against the fact that they cannot lose their starting goaltender for an extended period of time this season. And I think of Cujo back in early 2000s when he broke a wrist against St. Louis in February, I think missed 10-plus games, and Corey Schwab came in and sort of held water. They treaded water for about 10 to 11 games. At this day and age, you cannot afford to have your starting goaltender out of the lineup. Curtis McElwain, if I'm sure, can come in and do a good job, and there's enough talent in front of him. Frederick is their MVP by far, and he's going to get 60 starts this season without a doubt, and he's just hoping he can stay healthy. He's skinnier. He thinks he's stronger, and he certainly looks it. As long as the hockey gods are on his side, and he's able to play the majority of games this season, they're going to have a chance.
Yeah, they certainly will, Henny. When we're looking at Auston Matthews and the brilliant rookie season he had with 40 goals and 29 assists, a lot of people are anticipating these numbers to increase. What's a fair number to put on in Auston Matthews right now, point production, when everything's said and done, if Auston Matthews is healthy and does play the entire season?
Well, David, it's a good question. And of those 40 goals that he scored last season, 32 of those were at even strength. And if able to increase his power play totals, much like Nazem Kadri was able to do in a career, Nazem had 12 power play goals last season. We only saw 8 from Auston Matthews, and just credence to just how great a season he had when 32 of those were scored 5-on-5 or 4-on-4. So I just think if he can up his power play quotient, there's a chance that he could push 50. And again, the bottom line is he's got to stay healthy. But given what we saw of him in the preseason, 5 goals in 4 games, and the way he scored them, this is a very confident, talented hockey player, and the mix around him is fantastic. So could he do 50? Possibly. But if he were able to do 40 again, that'd be a great year as well.
We're in conversation with Paul Hendrick from Leaf TV here on rawmike.richards.com, brought to you by DKI Canada. It's interesting, Henny, looking at sort of the progression of these young guys. All of a sudden, Jake Gardiner amongst this group isn't the young guy anymore. It's kind of weird to even say that, considering how quickly things have progressed. And the one thing that people talked about a little bit was hockey IQ, which I think is a little unfair considering, the adjustments that Babcock has made with him, because I think sometimes it's about role. If we think he's a number 3 on this team, if we want to put it in that category, has it been a better role for him, therefore maybe not the criticism about hockey IQ?
You know what? I think now, Jake, and Mike, he's 407 games into his NHL career, all in Toronto. Never easy to do, to play the blue line and mature in Toronto with all those eyes on you. But there's a confidence level that goes back to 3 years ago when head coach Mike Babcock was hired on in that spring. One of the first phone calls he made, if it wasn't the first, it might have been no worse than the 4th or the 5th, was to Jake Gardiner, and putting a sense of belief into Jake that he is going to be one of his core players moving forward. And I don't think that has ever been forgotten on Jake, where you can go out, make a mistake, and not have to look over your shoulder as he had to do during the Randy Carlyle, coaching mentorship in Toronto. That hasn't been the case. Mike has lived with certain mistakes, and they're going to happen in the best league in the world. And so right now you're seeing the results of that, a very confident Jake Gardiner. But it goes with 407 NHL games. And I just think he's responded to all that experience and a belief in him by the coaching staff. And now we're starting to see it take shape. So, you mentioned, Morgan Riley is arguably your number 1. It wouldn't be hard to argue against a Jake Gardiner as your number 2.
Paul, before we talk to you here, I was discussing the signing this morning, the Winnipeg Jets signing Nick Ehlers to a 7-year contract at $42 million. It's a $6 million AVV. And the reason I'm putting into the conversation is, if you're part of the Leafs management group and you see a Nick Ehlers and what this guy can deliver between 25 and 30 goals, and it's a comfortable number, and it's almost like the kind of number that you might throw out to a William Nylander who's coming up soon, or a Mitch Marner who's coming up in a couple seasons. Is this the kind of contract we could see the Maple Leafs presenting to one of their young pieces, one of their top 6 forwards, and something that probably the Maple Leafs are going to be really comfortable with, considering the signing of the morning?
I think you're right, and so give them full credit for signing Nazem Kadri and Morgan Riley to the deals they did, the long-term deals. So with this big picture in mind, it also lends credence to the importance, David, of developing talent in your minor league system and acquiring depth, so that when they have to pay these elite players the money they're going to get, and $6 million, when you look at some of Toronto's talent, seems rather frugal. They're going to have to pay some big dollars. So this puts an importance on players like, I'm just going to throw names out there, the Josh Levos, if you will. Players that are going to come in and occupy roles on the 3rd and 4th line, and maybe 2nd line in spell duty, that are going to come under contract at a rather reasonable rate. Chicago's been able to do it. Pittsburgh has been able to do it and still keep its core together, which you're going to have to do moving forward. And you got to think of what Connor Brown is going to be making in 4 years. There's another guy they got for just over $2 million. So I think they're setting themselves up for the eventuality of having to pay Auston, William, and Mitch, and still being able to ice a very competitive team. But the pressure comes down with those other spots, whether it be third or fourth line or your D pairings. The depth in an organization to pay those guys at a reasonable rate so that you could afford your elite stars, which is going to be exorbitant, but that's just the current way of doing business right now in the NHL.
Henny, who's the leader on this team? I mean, they're all relatively within the same age group. A lot of them, Auston Matthews obviously is the bigger name if you want to weigh it that way, but that doesn't mean that particularly is the leader. Who's the leader on the team?
Well, you know what? Patrick Marleau's a silent leader. He's not a rah-rah type, but he's been around 19 seasons now in his 20th year and 38 years of age. You can't help but look to him for leadership. I think Morgan Riley, just 23, but has been 5 seasons with the organization at the NHL level. I think you look at him in a leadership role. And at 20 years of age, because he does a lot of his talking on the ice, and that's Auston Matthews. He's just a natural-born leader. He can say more by saying less, but there's no question he's looked at, and as he continues to mature in the next couple of years, that will grow. So from an older age concept, you'd have to think of Patrick Marleau. I would have to think Ron Hainsey as well, and Morgan Riley, and even Auston Matthews. But again, he doesn't say a lot, but he doesn't have to. Patrick Marleau might be one of the true leaders in this hockey club.
Paul, one final question from me, and thanks again for joining us here from Winnipeg. It's the Jets and the Toronto Maple Leafs opening up the NHL season, and we can't wait. So yesterday I did some predictions on the show, and I looked at that Atlantic division, and I said, I think it's the Maple Leafs division with Tampa Bay. They're going to be the 1 and 2 teams, in my opinion. I have the Maple Leafs slightly edging out a very good Lightning team. Where do you have the Maple Leafs at the end of the season if we're looking into a crystal ball that neither of us own? But nonetheless, people always ask opinions, and I'm asking for yours.
Under the proviso that they are able to stay healthy, and last season, David, they had 9 players play the entire season. 9. The year before, they only had 2. So somewhere in between, you've got to find a medium that will fit. But providing that the majority of the core guys are able to stay healthy and play the majority of the season, they'll compete with Tampa. Tampa, on the other hand, are going to be a tough team, and they battled out most of their core last season and just missed out in the last week and are making the postseason. So I think Tampa is indeed the team to beat. I think the Leafs are coming on. Whether this year is going to be another year in that step toward progression, we'll see. But it's going to be certainly up there. I don't know whether they're going to be good enough right now, but the question was asked last year, do you see the Leafs making the playoffs? I remember telling someone, let's talk about this come the end of January. Not really certain, but then all of a sudden you get to that point in time and hey, they're not only knocking on the door, they kick the door partially down. So let's just wait and see where they are coming the end of January. But right now on October 4th, they're in the mix.
Henny, thanks so much for joining us here this morning. A real pleasure. Great catching up with you. And hopefully we can do it again very soon. And I guess I should ask, with all the trouble in Barcelona, things still okay at home? Is there any fighting?
No,
is
thanks
there
for
any?
asking.
Yeah.
Mike, we were there just a week and a half afterwards. And, my mother-in-law's, still living in Madrid. So the big situation now amongst, I know beyond what you're talking about, is the province of Catalonia wanting to separate.
Yeah.
And, that country went through a civil war not too long ago, and there's fear by the older generation that something like this could happen again. I don't think it's going to happen again, but you've got a lot of young, emotional Catalonians who would like to be on their own, and the rest of the country who don't want to lose them. So I'll tell you, there's an eye to be kept on that end of Spain right now, beyond the tragedy that struck it, I guess, in the end of August.
Yeah, very scary indeed. Hey, Henny, thanks so much. You take care. We'll talk to you again real soon.
All right, guys. Pleasure, and thanks for having me.
That is Paul Hendrick from Leaf TV joining us here this morning on rawmikeRichards.com, brought to you by DKI Canada since 1992. You want to trust the triangle.
What? You just become become best friends.
Yep.